Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Oladipo Agboluaje's play, Early Morning. I'm reading it out of this collection, Plays 1, by Oberon Books. So this is a play about a group, primarily about a group of Nigerian immigrants to London who are working as office cleaners, basically. They're working in a bank. And they are discontent with their position in society. They're discontent with the way in which they have been treated by a society that realistically does not value their labor, does not value them. And one of the things that Agboluaje does that's really interesting is that this is not a simplistic play in which it's not just that Britain is taken to task for not appreciating, not recognizing the labor of immigrants and of people of color, of ethnic minorities within Britain, etc., etc. But also those communities themselves are taken to task for the ways in which they misimagine what Britain may represent. This is kind of like immigrant literature to the U.S. in say around the turn of the 20th century, say 1880s up through 1920s or so. This idea that like the streets are paved with gold and everyone's a millionaire and all this stuff. And then immigrants arrived in the U.S. and found that typically they were living in tenements. Typically they were working for very low wages. They didn't have any sort of social protections, etc., etc. And Agboluaje, one of the things that he does that's really interesting is that he addresses both sides of this. He is critical of Britain and capitalism for the way that it fails to appreciate and compensate workers, particularly immigrant workers and workers of color. But he's also critical of those workers for dreaming unrealistic dreams about what Britain can represent. So these ideas of sort of capitalism and wastefulness are introduced almost from the beginning of the play, because we have Mama Paul and Kola. Mama Paul is a sort of middle-aged woman who's been working with this cleaning company for quite a while. Kola is a younger guy, 20 years old. He's very new to the company. So they start out so they start out and they introduce these sort of themes of how messy this office is, how much wasted paper, wasted material is created by this bank and things like this. Eventually, Ojo comes in, and he's an older guy who, again, Mr. Ojo has been with the company for a good long time. So you have two more senior people, and you have one more junior person. One of the things that they spend a decent amount of time talking about is how do you actually create change? Ola is sympathetic to student demonstrators in Nigeria who push for better conditions. Ojo and Mama Paul are not as sympathetic. Partially they are not as sympathetic because there are class tensions not just between the workers and the company or the bank or whatever it is. So there are those. This is one of the interesting things about Agboluaje's play, is there are these different levels of tensions, right? There are the class tensions to the extent that the three workers, Ojo, Mama Paul, and Kola, are sort of united in their opposition to capitalism. But then there's also divisions within them, because Mama Paul and Ojo are more sort of traditionally working class people. It seems Ojo's a little hard to pin down because there's some references to him maybe having had money or having had a higher position back in Nigeria, but it's not 100% clear as far as I remember. Mama Paul apparently had some social connections in Nigeria because she was dating somebody who was apparently high up in one of the military dictatorships. Probably the implication is Sani Abacha's dictatorship, but she isn't quite explicit about who it was that she was dating. Possibly Abacha himself. But they figure themselves as working class characters, and they see Kola as kind of an upper class kid who's slumming it to make a little bit of money. So there are these tensions there as well. We see that, for instance, Mama Paul tells this story about a guy in Nigeria who, when he was rejected by a woman romantically, poured acid over her head, and basically she was unable to get any sort of redress for this. She went to the media, she went to the government, she went to the police, and people were just like, meh. And what Kola says is, that guy will return home to a hero's welcome. Nobody will question him over his past, except the students, even if it means taking to the streets. That's why our government keeps closing down our institutions. They fear our potential to overthrow them. Ojo says, you want to copy your South Korean counterparts, Abi? Which means, is that it? In Yoruba, I think. Not 100% sure. Anyway, can you catch surface-to-air missiles between your toes? Pompous weaklings like you will stand in front of tanks blowing grammar. Kola says, that does not mean we should not fight for change. Nigeria is for all of us. Why should only a few bastards and their spoilt children enjoy while the rest of us eat out of dustbins? Mama Paul says, Brent calling Bunny Light crude? You are one of the spoiled brats benefiting from the system, and you talk of change. Kola says, am I not a cleaner? Am I one of you? Mama Paul says, once your allowance arrives, you will disappear. People like us send money to our families. You collect money from yours. You males are all the same. Take, take, take. So we've got those class tensions within this group, and that does eventually sort of boil over because Ojo, who has brought in a bag containing some sort of mysterious something or another's, he's brought in a bag from outside, eventually reveals what is contained in the bag, which is pistols. So he plans to lead a cleaners' revolution and establish the Blacktocracy. Basically, the idea is that he will lead a revolution of all of the cleaners, the workers, immigrants from Africa, from the Caribbean, possibly from India, South Asia. It's not 100% clear whether they're going to be included. But basically the idea is that the workers, the sort of lumpen proletariat workers, the lowest social tier of the working class, will rise up and overthrow those on top. So he brings Mama Paul into the revolution. Kola, he is somewhat more reluctant to bring into the revolution. And in fact, there is some internal descend somewhat later on in the play. Mama Paul and Kola particularly have disagreements. And so Ojo Ojo makes Kola the Minister of Education, but he doesn't 100% trust him, and at various times Kola is sort of in and out of the revolution. He sort of gets yo-yoed back and forth on whether or not he's part of it. The revolution kind of breaks down at one point. Ojo and Mama Paul force Kola to lick the bottom of Ojo's shoe, which has menstrual blood on it from when he was cleaning the bathroom. Kola then goes and throws up, somewhat predictably. But then Ojo and Mama Paul lower their guard. Kola gets hold of a gun, and he basically declares himself the new leader of the Blacktocratic Revolution. He forces Ojo to lick the bottom of his other shoe, which has some feces on it. He kind of rapes Mama Paul. Like, he prematurely ejaculates, but then mimes raping her to establish his power. So, like, things break down. But then at the end of the play, they all come back together. All three of them sort of prepare for the Blacktocratic Revolution as the banking staff start arriving. But there's some interesting philosophical divisions between them that go beyond the sort of the infighting as such. One of those divisions is between what we might call Manichaeism and negritude. So, Manichaeism, basically, this is an idea that gets developed. He doesn't invent it, but it gets developed in a post-colonialist context by Frantz Fanon. Basically, the idea of Manichaeism as developed in a book like The Wretched of the Earth is that colonialism, by its nature, constructs a binary society, a society built on oppositions, the settler versus the native, and their interests are diametrically opposed, and the only way that they can encounter one another is through violence. So this is the idea adopted by Mama Paul. At one point, Ojo says, "How ruthless can you be?" And Mama Paul says, "Do we not breathe air? Do we not drink water? Ruthlessness, is it not human nature? Why be the slave when you can be the master? Blackocracy's flag shall fly above a mountain of bones, above the rubble of cities. We shall conquer all races. We shall take back what the Westerner and the Arab have taken from us. We shall pay them back with their own coins. We shall make them slaves of the revolution." So this is the Manichaean idea, this idea that the only way in which post-colonial revolution, or in this case, the revolution of a subordinated underclass, can occur is through violence. But Kola offers a different view of what the Blacktocratic Revolution can be, which is negritude, developed by people like, I'm blanking on his name, I can't remember. Senghor. Sorry, Leopold Senghor. So, what he says about this as an alternative to the violence of Manichaeism is there is this philosophy called negritude. It's a consciousness of blackness in which we are which we are the opposite of the white man. Where he is violent, we are peace-loving. We sing where he shouts. We dance where he does military drill. And so this is an idea as a way of sort of providing an alternative to the violence of colonialism, the violence of capitalism as well. And basically the idea here is that if you meet violence with violence, then what you get is further violence. You do not get a resolution of violence. And so this is kind of the Martin Luther King nonviolent civil disobedience ideology. This is a sort of foundational element of this. The same thing with Gandhi. The idea that you resist a violent system not by deploying violence against it, but by refusing violence. And so Kola presents this as an alternative to the violence of Manichaeism, to the violence proposed by Mama Paul. But both Ojo and Mama Paul reject this, and their rejection is in some ways very pragmatic. Ojo says, and that is why the monkey has a long tail. That is how our forefathers danced their way into slavery and colonialism. You will break dance when the multinationals collude with our government and force our farmers to buy GM seeds. Mama Paul says, are you blind to the slaughters of Africans because of our mineral resources? Which poor people benefit from it? You dare open your mouth to tell us about black philosophy of peace and love when you are one of the bloody collaborators? And so this is one of the things that we get here, is we get this conflict over means, strategies, techniques for breaking the power of colonialism, of capitalism, of racism within societies, etc., etc. And there is that legitimate question, right, of, yes, in principle, deploying violence in response to violence leads to more violence. But in practice, sometimes peace, love, art does not prevent violence. If the failure to resist violence with violence means that you are killed, you are enslaved, your resources are exploited, etc., etc., is it a good option?